begins in the quiet hours after a crime, when panic rises and certainty disappears. In those moments, police turn to a select group of people who hold the power to see what others cannot. Expert witnesses, scientists, analysts, and specialists who read the invisible clues criminals leave behind. They are the thread that binds evidence to truth. Without them, many of the world's most perplexing cases would remain unsolved. This is the story of two such cases, and the experts who helped bring justice when the odds seemed impossible. In 2013, soil scientist Lorna Dawson received a call that instantly transported her back in time. Police were asking her to examine samples from one of Scotland's most haunting mysteries, the World's End murders. Immediately, memories surfaced. She had been a young student when it happened, living in Edinburgh in 1977, when fear gripped the city after two teenage girls were found murdered. They were Helen Scott and Christine Eadie, both just 17. On the evening of October 15th, they had gone out for what should have been an ordinary night with friends. Witnesses recalled seeing them in Edinburgh's famous World's End pub, chatting with two men they didn't know. At closing time, the pair were last seen walking down St. Mary's Street with those same strangers. Back home, Helen's younger brother remembers the light still on in the living room, his mother pacing, waiting, worrying. When dawn came and neither girl returned, dread settled in. The news broke the next day. A dog walker discovered what he first thought was a mannequin washed up on the beach. But it wasn't. It was Christine. As detectives rushed to the scene, another call came in. A farmer had found a second body miles away, lying on top of a coat in the center of a field. It was Helen. The city was shaken. Two young girls from trusting families, full of promise, stolen in one night. Forensic science was young in 1977, but police worked meticulously. One man in particular, a crime lab scientist named Lester Knibb, gathered every scrap of potential evidence from the bodies, their clothing, and the scenes. He preserved soil, fibers, and samples that no technology of the time could decipher, but he preserved them anyway, carefully, precisely, knowing that someday science might catch up. One piece frustrated investigators more than any other: a large stain inside Helen's coat. They believed it belonged to the killer, but in the 70s, there was no way to prove it. For nearly 30 years, the case stalled. Then, in 2003, DNA science finally gave detectives their break. The stain on Helen's coat, once an indecipherable mixture, was now separable. Analysts pulled out 3 profiles, one female, Helen, and 2 different men. One of the male profiles didn't match anyone in the database, but the other did. It belonged to Angus Sinclair, a convicted murderer. Police soon connected the second profile to Sinclair's brother-in-law, Gordon Hamilton. Hamilton had died in 1996, but Sinclair was very much alive, already behind bars for another killing. Prosecutors moved fast, but Sinclair claimed the DNA only proved one thing: that he'd had consensual sex with the girls, not that he had killed them. With no way to refute that argument, the jury acquitted him. Detectives were crushed. They feared the case might be lost forever, but science was still evolving, and someone, somewhere, wasn't ready to give up. That someone turned out to be soil expert Lorna Dawson. Between the failed prosecution and 2013, she had developed new methods to analyze the organic makeup of soil. Soil varies from place to place, even from depth to depth. It can tell you where someone has been, or whether they've walked or been carried. Investigators handed her the samples Lester Knibb had preserved decades earlier. She analyzed soil from Helen's feet, tiny clumps trapped in the treads of her shoes, and compared them with soil taken from the field where she'd been found. Two distinct soil types emerged. One matched the wheat field. Another matched the grassy verge leading to it. Helen had walked into the field. She had been alive. This single discovery shattered Sinclair's previous claims. It meant there was no mystery second killer. It meant Helen hadn't wandered off. She had been forced into that field alive and murdered there. At the same time, new advances in DNA allowed specialists to examine the knots used to bind her. Inside the tight fibers, they found Sinclair's DNA. Expert testimony showed the knots hadn't just been tied by him. They had been tied tightly, forcibly, during the attack. Piece by piece, the picture rebuilt itself. Soil proved where Helen had walked. Knots, tied by Sinclair, placed him at the killing. Combined with the original DNA and other evidence, it formed a story that Sinclair could no longer explain away. In 2014, 37 years after the murders, Angus Sinclair stood trial again. Forensic experts took the stand, translating decades of science into a story the jury could understand. When Dawson explained that Helen walked to her death, the courtroom fell silent. This time, the evidence held. The jury found Sinclair guilty. His sentence, 37 years, symbolized the years the families had waited. For Helen and Christine's loved ones, nothing could undo the loss. But at last, there was justice. And this was not the only case where expert science turned the tide. In 2009, in Scamandon Moor near Huddersfield, the body of 51-year-old Christopher Pratt was found lying naked on open land. He had been missing for days. The question investigators needed answered was immediate and crucial. How long had he been dead? Forensic entomologist Martin Hall knew where to look. On bodies exposed to the elements, blowflies are often the first visitors. They lay eggs quickly. Those eggs hatch into larvae, maggots, whose growth rate depends entirely on temperature. The size of the larvae found on Christopher's body could reveal how long he'd been lying there. But there was a problem. Temperature on Scamandon Moor is unpredictable. Even a variation of just 6 degrees can dramatically change a larva's growth rate. Hall set up data loggers to record temperature at the exact location where the body had been found, then compared those recordings to the regional weather station. With this, he could calculate the thermal age of the insects. The answer was chilling. The insects showed Christopher Pratt had been dead for over 6 days, lying on the moor since shortly after he was last seen alive. At the same time, detectives identified a man Christopher had been with, a convicted murderer named Desmond Lee. Lee had already served 14 years for killing his landlady and was living on a strict life license. He and Christopher had met in a gay sauna and formed a relationship. Detectives brought him in for questioning. Cornered by the timeline established through the insects, Lee admitted Christopher died in his flat, but called it an accident. His neck was broken, his voice box crushed. Panicked, Lee said, he dumped the body on the moor, but his actions told a different story. Before even disposing of Christopher's remains, Lee used the dead man's credit card for a shopping spree. He paid off his phone bill, went to a supermarket, bought personal items, then returned to the flat, stuffed the body into a vehicle, and abandoned it in the wilderness. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. CCTV placed Christopher at Lee's flat. Entomology proved he'd been dead since the night he arrived. Lee's past and his callous behavior afterwards sealed the verdict. He was found guilty and sentenced to life once again. For Martin Hall, as for all expert witnesses, the mission goes beyond science. It's about restoring truth when someone's life has been stolen. Some crimes leave no witnesses. Some killers leave no confession. But the earth remembers. The insects remember. The fibers, the knots, the stains. They all remember. Expert witnesses are the interpreters of that silent testimony. And as long as they continue to read those hidden clues, even the coldest cases can one day find justice. These cases reveal a truth we often forget. Even when time tries to bury a crime, the world around it still remembers. The soil beneath a body, the insects drawn to silence, the fibers that cling to a victim's final moments. They all carry the weight of what happened, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Justice didn't come quickly for Helen, Christine, or Christopher. Their families lived through years of unanswered questions, through fear, through grief that never loosened its grip. But science kept moving. And the experts who refused to give up, they kept moving too. The men who did this believed the decades would protect them, but time didn't protect them. It protected the truth. Because the earth remembered, the evidence remembered. And when the right minds finally looked closely enough, the truth rose back to the surface, undeniable and unbroken. We cannot rewrite what happened to them. But we can remember this: even the darkest secrets cannot stay hidden forever. Not while there are people willing to search for the light.